First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Kirsty, I'm Head of Product here at ProdPad, and Liz is our Chief Commercial Officer that comes from a long tail of product and PM experience, so knows what it's like. And so our webinar series is all about providing content, learning and sharing around interesting topics we think you guys will care about. And today, Liz and I will be talking you through how to find the perfect fit between your roadmap and your product backlog, one of the inaugural questions. As always, this will be recorded and the slides will be made available afterwards on our website, where you can also find loads of past recordings of really great content as well. So make sure you check that out. I think that's it from me on the kind of housekeeping. So I will pass over to Liz to introduce herself properly and kickstart the webinar.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kirsty. So yeah, as I say, quick intro from me. I've been in ProdPad for about 5 years now. So I suppose I've gone a little bit over to the dark side and more into the commercial side of things. But my history is in product. I've worked in product since about 2006 as product manager, product director. I've worked in large corporate environments. I've worked in startups, worked in sort of middle-sized companies, worked as the first product manager, worked as part of a larger team. And on a day-to-day basis, I speak to product managers all over the world and hear all sorts of problems and all sorts of questions. Now, because of that, one of the topics that I've wanted to talk about for a while is this one that we're going to cover today. When I think back to my days as a product manager, I knew I was responsible for a backlog. I knew I was responsible for a roadmap, but I didn't always understand the difference between the two or know how to explain the difference between the two and how to use them in different scenarios. So in this webinar, what I'm hoping I can do is explain the difference between those two very important product management concepts, and also think about when to use each of them in sort of day-to-day life. Now, I suspect if you're here, you're the kind of person who spends time reading and watching and listening to all these different thought leadership materials and content that's out there. And I don't know if you've noticed that they lean very heavily on the strategy side of the job. It's almost a sin to be seen as being a tactical person. If you're a product manager, you should be strategic. And we can see that when you look at some of the things that you see on Twitter and LinkedIn and Medium. There is so much content out there about defining product strategy. Now, that's great. That's really helpful. But I don't know about you, but while I know it's important to have a good strategy in place, I also know that the life of a product manager is more than that. Now, it's ideal if you can stay away from project delivery, yes, but at the same time, on a day-to-day basis, you're going to be in the weeds and looking at tactics and sometimes doing more of that than you'd like to. Sometimes you become much more tactical than you'd like to be. Sometimes you really get caught out firefighting and looking at bugs with people, or being asked to look at bugs and asked to ask questions and be the product expert. And you probably see these kinds of things happening in your day-to-day job all the time. You'll be answering emails, going to meetings, resolving conflicts between people, settling politics, getting buy-in from stakeholders, reacting to changes. Can you just test this? Can you do that? Can you answer this question? A product manager can get pulled from pillar to post. Now, some of the work that we do as product managers can be useful when it comes to doing things like spending time talking to customers to learn, writing user stories, looking at competitors and so on. It's all tactical work. It's work that has to be done. It's part of your arsenal of tactics that you need to do to get towards the point of launch. But sometimes it feels like you're doing some unnecessary stuff. Now, just want to kind of pause at this point and talk about the definitions that I like to use around strategy and tactics. For me, the strategy is the list of problems that you're wanting to solve. It's a way of defining what your return on investment is likely to be. And it's it's something that you need to link back to the goals that you have in your business. We don't always just spend all our time thinking and documenting plans. We also have to execute on those plans. And some of that stuff is much more tactical. So, for example, here I've talked about doing problem discovery, validating solutions, measuring success. It's not coding, it's not doing the work of delivering a product, but it's doing the work that's required to get yourself from strategy to something where you can actually launch. Now, what I'd like to do at this point is maybe run a bit of a poll with you folks here and see if I can find out from you how much time you spend on strategy versus tactics. Let me just see if I can do that. No, I can't. I'm going to relaunch it. There we go. Okay. So hopefully we can see a poll on the screen right now. And I'd really like to get a feel from the people on the call. And we've got sort of 70, 80 people on the call at the moment as to how much time you spend being tactical versus being strategic. And it's really interesting. I'm watching the answers come in here, and I think we're kind of settling out actually now. We're just getting a few more. And it's funny that there's so much that we hear from day to day in the Twitter world, the LinkedIn world, the Medium world about you should be more strategic, you should be more strategic. And yet what we're seeing here is what I thought we would see. And in fact, I'll just end it now and see if we can share these results. Can you see those results now? Yeah, it looks like we have got some people saying that they're spending time mostly on strategy. We've got some people saying 50-50, but look at that. 62% of our folks here are saying they're spending most of their time on tactics. And I think we're almost taught that's not necessarily a good thing, that product managers are too tactical. And maybe I'm going to help you feel a bit more comfortable with the fact that you're spending so much time on tactics, because I do think that maybe differently to what we're hearing from the Twitter world and the LinkedIn world and so on, that it's not always a bad thing to be tactical. Now, this is where I start to change the definition up a little bit and think about roadmaps and backlogs. So I think it's unreasonable to expect a product manager to be purely strategic. And so it's lovely to see that there's this mix of people who are sort of strategic and tactical, but there's definitely a leaning towards having strategy in your arsenal. I don't think product managers can spend all their time thinking and documenting their plans, as much as that's really useful stuff when we want to have those plans. Product managers are great at helping things to move along to get towards the point of launch. And again, I'm not talking about project delivery. I'm talking about executing on a strategy, helping stakeholders to understand what's going on, using the roadmap to identify what these problems to solve are and how solving those problems will give us a return on investment, linking strategy back to goals, but more importantly, taking that roadmap and executing on it, doing the problem discovery that's necessary, validating the solutions that are in the backlog and measuring the success of what's been done. As I've kind of, I have to have a meme. I'm sorry. I have to have a meme in every one of my presentations. It's all very well defining a roadmap, but at the end of the day, if you don't execute on that roadmap, it's just as bad as creating the wrong roadmap, really, unless you're actually taking a problem and solving it and achieving outcomes. Then your roadmap is really just a piece of paper or an image on a screen. It's not something that's actually helping you to achieve your goals. And in order to do that, we do need to have tactics as well. I mean, I think we do want to get the balance right between the two. We do want to have that balance between strategy and tactics. And sometimes that means you might feel you're doing more tactical stuff than you are strategic. And sometimes you might feel like you're doing more strategic than tactical. But finding the right balance between what works for you as a product manager and what the business needs is something that's really important. Now, what I'm hoping I can do as we go through the rest of these slides today is give you a bit of an insight, and particularly when we come to talk to Kirsty and look at how we work at ProdPad or how she works at ProdPad, and get that balance right and give you some tips on how to do that. Now, moving on from this, if we start to think about the strategic side and the tactical side, let's start with the roadmap first. Okay. Now, I suspect some of you may be familiar with ProdPad already. Some of you maybe not, but this is what we talk about at ProdPad as a great way or an ideal way to structure your roadmap. When you think about the roadmap being strategy, think about focusing your roadmap on not on features to build, but problems to solve, and the order in which you plan to solve these problems. Think about your roadmap, and I'm going to use Jana's words here. These are Jana's words, not mine, but Your roadmap is a prototype for your strategy. It's a way of taking the strategy, the plans that you have, the direction that you want to move in the order in which you want to move. It's a way of taking that information and sharing it in a form that's easy for you to understand, but most importantly for your stakeholders to understand. Not only that, it's not just about what problems you're hoping to solve, but about the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. Now, by sharing your plans in this way, you'll increase transparency into those plans because they're just easier to understand. So it's easier for people to consume them. And not only that, you'll open the door for people to tell you what they think, because once they understand it, they're likely to have opinions on it. And then they're going to want to tell you those opinions. And let's face it, as product managers, we want to know what those opinions are so that we can start to look for themes and sort of insights in the stuff that's coming through. So having a roadmap that looks like this means that you'll be able to align everybody around a common plan that you're iterating on and improving as you get more and more feedback. It means that you're going to increase focus in terms of what problems you want to solve, what outcomes you're trying to achieve. And it also means that you're going to ensure everybody's working on solving the right problem. So, as I say, you may or may not be familiar with ProdPad and the way that we talk about roadmaps, but this is definitely something that's maybe a little bit different to what you've come across in some of your other investigations into road mapping. But it's something that we find works well for us. And I can tell you personally, as an ex-PM, it worked well for me. Now, there's another way of looking at it. It's not just about what problems that you want to solve. It's about putting them down on the page in a way that you are making it clear to people that there are some things you know about really well, some things that you're still learning about, and some things that you just know nothing about at all. And it's about identifying the fact that there are different levels of granularity depending on how far you are through the process of understanding a problem. Generally, what we like to see when we're talking to customers about their roadmaps and the way that we work ourselves is that something will start out in that later column as just really high level, really broad, really fuzzy, really almost aspirational. This is something we know we want to do. But it's so far out in time, or it's so far out in terms of how much we understand, that we just don't know what we're doing with it yet. And so it's something that we need to learn more about. And as we learn more about it, we'll start to break it down into things that are easier to understand and easier to research, and that can be turned into research projects, discovery projects in their own right. And then they kind of end up in that next column where we're actively doing discovery, where we know these are things we want to learn more about. By the time you have learned enough about them that they become something that you can execute on, they land in this now column. They turn into things that are really specific, that are well specified, less flexible because you've done the work you need to do to understand them. And they tend to be defined enough that you can hand them over to your development team and have them start working on these things. So we're showing here that there's a whole load of work that needs to be done before you develop. And we're highlighting the fact that discovery is important. And again, with this now, next, later, or this sort of lean structure, it means that we're able to show direction and start conversations without necessarily getting caught up on delivery dates and all the rest of that stuff that we'll love to hate to talk about. Now, in terms of how you might lay that out, think about on your roadmap having multiple initiatives that are really clearly linked back to the objectives that you are trying to achieve, or the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Example here, we're trying to get user growth. The most important thing for our product is to get user growth. It could be that you're trying to reduce churn, or you're trying to increase in a particular market segment, or whatever it might be, but you have an overall outcome you're trying to achieve. And we can see that there is a problem that we can solve for our market that's going to help us to achieve that outcome. So I'm not getting into features at this point. I'm not getting into the specifics of what's going to be done, but I'm focusing on outcomes and problems to solve. Very much an outcome-oriented approach, very much shying away from that feature factory approach, and very much opening the door for questions about what we want to do. Very strategic, in fact, you might say. I think it's really a good idea to think about your roadmap not as a commitment, not as a list of features to build, because that implies that you do everything. And if we knew everything, we wouldn't need product managers, let's face it. Your roadmap is a communication tool. It's a way of starting conversations. It's a way of making sure that you have all the facts before you go ahead and commit to something, and commit to the kind of stuff that you would put into a release plan. So thinking about all of this, our roadmap is very strategic. It's very much focused on problems to solve. It's a communication piece. It's something that you're using to have conversations with people. But when we look at the tactical side of things, this is where we have our backlog. Now, it's different to the roadmap. Our backlog is a list of potential things that we might want to execute. Where your roadmap focuses on the problems to solve and the potential value of solving them, your backlog is a list of all the things you could do. But like any list, it's kind of really amorphous. It's made up of big things, little things. I tend to think about rocks and pebbles and sand, all different sizes, all different values. Some of it's going to be really well defined. Some of it's going to be really fuzzy. Some of it will be rough concepts. Some of it might just be experiments that you want to run to learn more stuff. But it's just kind of this big lump, amorphous lump of stuff. I found this Oxford English Dictionary definition of backlog: an accumulation of uncompleted work or matters needing to be dealt with. That sounds like scary, to be honest with you. It's got the words that are similar words are things like logjam, pile, heap, mountain, excess. Again, scary stuff that you think, oh, I'm never going to get through this backlog. It's the stuff of nightmares for product managers. What we need to be able to do is filter that backlog. We need to be able to find out what's worth doing. Now, we all know as product managers that prioritization is a major part of our life. And it's really difficult. It's really hard. There are frameworks out there to help us, we think. We've got ICE, we've got RICE, we've got Moscow, we've got weighted, shortest job first, all these acronyms, so many of them. It's all confusing just learning them, let alone doing the prioritization itself. Now, all of them require you to make a comparison of all of your potential ideas to each other and score them and keep those scores up to date. I mean, it's a crazy amount of work. We all know product managers don't have enough time to do everything they need to do. And yet we're supposed to check every single idea in our backlog and work out whether it's more important than the one next to it. It's like, yeah, not the best plan. I tend to think about that backlog in terms of what's relevant for my strategy and what's not. Think about where the idea is in the process of being understood. Like, there's no point trying to prioritize ideas where you've not even reviewed it yet, or where you haven't done enough discovery to understand it. There's no point asking development to do estimates on ideas to help you with your return on investment stuff, or your weighted shortest job first, or all that stuff. There's no point asking development to do that when we don't really know if the idea is going to help us achieve our goals yet, or if it's not well specced out enough for them to be able to do it. And this is where we can get more tactical with our backlog. We can start to break the backlog into stages and think about that kind of build, measure, learn cycle. Or I sometimes think it would be better if it was learn, build, measure. But there you go. You know where I'm coming from with it. I can see Kirsty nodding. Yeah, she agrees. So this is where I'd like to take that big backlog that we've got and turn it into, well, you'll be able to see from the space here, there's three pieces I like. So first of all, look at our discovery backlog. Now, our discovery backlog is all the stuff that is just really amorphous, various levels of detail, really hard to prioritize, really just too big to actually get through. But it's the kind of stuff where you want to look through and identify the things that are going to be linked to your roadmap. I would say take anything that you think is in your discovery backlog. The first thing to do is see if any of it is relevant to the problems on your roadmap, and make sure that you almost link them to the initiatives that you have. And if it's not linked to an initiative, if it's not something that's going to help you achieve something on your roadmap, don't even bother spending time on it, because it's almost just a waste of time. The next stage, after you've taken the ideas that are linked to your backlog and done that discovery work that you need to do, is to think about turning them or adding them to your development backlog. Now, this is the stuff that you're going to be keeping, honestly, in Jira or Trello or any of those kinds of places. This is where you're taking the ideas you've done discovery around, and you've given them to your development team but you need to give them stuff that's useful to them. I've been a product manager who's handed over an idea to a developer who's like honestly laughed at me because he's gone, I can't develop this. There's not enough information in here for me to be able to do it. Developers need, and justifiably, absolutely should have, a backlog that is tidy, is well organized, is detailed specs, is well prioritized, and is achievable for them in the short term. So don't give them what is effectively a discovery backlog, which is just this amorphous list of stuff. Only give your developers the ideas that you have looked at, done discovery around, tidied up, written the specs out, and are really the next few sprints worth of work. Now, I kind of want to introduce a third backlog, and that's the outcome backlog. Now, these are ideas or epics or tickets or whatever you want to call them that are code complete. And you think, well, why on earth would you put code complete ideas into a backlog? These are things which have been done, and we've invested time, effort, money, resources into these. We've probably started building up to a launch on these. So our stakeholders around the product team are working on these. We're creating websites, sales artifacts, marketing materials, all sorts of stuff around these things. We need to make sure that we've spent the time wisely, and we need to be able to learn from what's happened with the things that we've spent our time and money on. So these are things that are code complete, that are released in our product or maybe in beta, so that we're just learning about them before we go for that wider release. But we're measuring to see if they really did what they should have done. Now, if we did our work right back at the discovery phase and ruled things out that weren't going to meet the needs that we had, hopefully they won't get that far. But if they have got all the way through to the outcome stage, let's measure them and let's make sure that they really did work. Now, we've talked a little bit about the backlog here, and now I am curious as to how you would organise your own backlog. And so I have another poll for you. What I'd like to know is, how do you organise your backlog, and how do you split your work out? Or have you just got this big one messy list of stuff that is just all sorts of stuff all over the place? You never know what's going to happen with it. Most of you probably are splitting between discovery and development, which is brilliant. And I think we're going to end that just there and share those results. Hopefully you can see those results on your screen. So it looks like, we've got quite a few folks on the call who've got one big messy list. I'm really hopeful that means that you can take some of the stuff that I've talked about today, and that will help you to manage that list. I'm sure your development teams are a lot happier that you don't just give them a mass of stuff in Jira to tackle. We did have a couple of people splitting out into outcome backlogs. That's brilliant to see. I'd love to see more of that. I'm now going to be passing things over to Kirsty. It's her turn to chat. Kirsty's our head of product at ProdPad. So as much as I'm sitting telling you all of this wonderful stuff that I've learned over the years, the person in our team, or one of the people in our team who's really putting this into practice at the moment, is you, Kirsty.
This will be based on how we work at ProdPad and based on our cadence of release and how we do product and development. But hopefully some of it can be useful to you guys that have obviously different cadences and stuff. But yeah.
So from when we were chatting over the last few weeks and when we started to put some of these slides together, what I discovered from you was really this kind of cadence-based approach, which is very tactical, but helps you to execute on the strategy that you have, and even to build the strategy that you've got. And when we talked about it, you said you split this out really between sort of yearly stuff, or yearly or quarterly stuff that you do monthly, stuff that you do every week or two, and daily stuff. And really, as you become more frequent in the work that you're doing, you become more tactical. And from what I could see, there were certainly some things that you did yearly or quarterly that were very much more strategic. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
At ProdPad, we work to the OKR model. So we set annual OKRs, which are company-wide, but we also set quarterly OKRs as well that are more team or product specific. So one of the things that I do on a kind of quarterly basis, as well as slightly more frequently, is kind of the roadmap rejig, so to speak. So I think Liz put it really well earlier in that the roadmap is a kind of communication and a prototype for your strategy. And that's very much how we utilize it here. So once we've set our quarterly objectives, we will have a big session as a team to have a look at what we've got on the roadmap and any new initiatives or ideas that we think need adding to help us move the needle on those things, and rejig the roadmap accordingly to make sure we've got the things that are going to best help us achieve those objectives and key results. So the big roadmap prioritization happens on a quarterly basis, but it's something that is monitored and updated on a more regular cadence. Feel free to go have a look at it, prodpad.com/our roadmap. So this is not only a communication tool for the internal team to see what we're up to and what types of problems we're looking to solve, but for you guys that are our customers, get to see it as well, which is quite insightful, I think, for many of you when you see what we're kind of working on, what's coming up, but also for potential new customers as well, to the types of problems we're looking to solve and if that aligns with the problems they have when they're looking for a tool like ProdPad as well. I find having a public version actually super useful because we get active feedback on it from people, which is really nice as well and helps feed into what's important and what's not as well.
And then we also, talking about working in that strategic way, you are looking as well on a monthly basis, would you say, at the success and how well things are working?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, this is one of the most important pieces of being in product. And unfortunately, it's often the thing that gets left behind a lot of the time due to time pressures. But for every idea or initiative that we're looking to undertake, we always will set out target outcomes for what we're looking to achieve by delivering that piece of work, no matter if it's a really small, quick update to a button CTA, for example, versus a whole brand new feature. So once that's live, these ideas move into what Liz outlined as our outcome backlog, where they sit and move from dev back to us in product. We generally give things a kind of 4-week run in the wild, and then we'll check back in and crucially share that back with the team as well. I think it's really important for the team to understand the work they've shipped and the impact that's had, not just in the product and dev team, but in marketing and sales and the wider team as well. And if things haven't hit the target outcomes, that's when they'll loop back into potentially our discovery or our development backlog for the next iteration. It's too often in the world that things are shipped and never touched again. So I think it's really important to be checking back in, seeing what you've moved and then kind of iterating.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from sort of what's monthly, the stuff that you do every sort of week or two, yeah? So we've got here things like prioritizing the dev backlog, reviewing new stuff and doing customer interviews. So when you say you're prioritizing the dev backlog, what are you really doing with that?
Yeah, so as I said, this is obviously the cadence of this. It relates to our own dev cadence. So we work in 2 weekly sprints. So on a kind of 2 weekly basis, I'm prepping what we want to put in the next sprint for dev. So it's a matter of kind of looking what's left over from the last, because it's very rare they finish everything as much as hard as they try. And then looking at all the things that are ready to roll from our side, from the product side, that finish discovery, validation, and we have good confidence that are going to move the needle on things, and pushing that over to dev. So this is where the workflow comes into it. So within ProdPad, it's a critical tool for me that allows me to do my job every day. And so I have columns set out, as you can see here. So I have a column ready to prio, where basically anything sits. And then when it's ready to roll, I can push it over to dev. We use Trello, as you can probably see from the little logo there, luckily, rather than Jira. So once we've pushed it to dev, it syncs with Trello. And that's when it's kind of in the hands of dev and they kind of move it through their side. And then it obviously reflects back in ProdPad, so I can keep an eye on what's going on. But yeah, so it's a mixture of new features and work that's carried over, as well as obviously any new high priority bugs come in. We're prioritizing around on a kind of 2 weekly basis.
Okay, so you've kind of taken the broad brushstroke backlogs and you've started to break them down into these smaller ones. Yep. So that you're almost pushing things through that workflow and you can tell for any one of these what needs to happen with it next.
Exactly, yeah. And I think a lot of the things we're talking about here and the cadences that I've put into place help me keep on top of all of this stuff and allow me to have the time to do the deep work that often us product managers don't have time to do, because we do get stuck in the firefighting and tactical all the time. So these are some of the kind of mechanisms I've developed and timeframes to do things, which still give me that space to do the discovery and the research and the strategy work that I also need to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
And you've also talked about triaging new ideas. And I can see here again, we've got a snapshot from our own ProdPad. Of course, it's all blurred, but this is some of the newer ideas we've got and the things that have been reviewed and ready to go through into that kind of discovery cycle.
Yeah.
What sort of things do you do when you're doing triage and what are you looking for?
triaging new ideas on a regular cadence, again, I think is super important for engagement with the rest of the team, not just for their ideas, but actually with ProdPad as a tool as well, because I think ProdPad works best when you've got the whole team invested in contributing to it. So I never want the team to feel like their ideas are just being like chucked into a black hole and no one's ever looking at them. And that often can be the case in a lot of places. So I make sure, I mean, obviously there's some weeks where I just don't get time to do it, but I try my best to, on a weekly basis, come in and review any new ideas. The critical thing I'm looking at there when new ideas come in is whether it's going to help us meet our objectives and outcomes we've set for this quarter or the next couple of quarters. If it doesn't, then I will archive and snooze it, because I like to keep our backlog quite trim for a number of reasons, and I'm sure that'll be a discussion we get into in a bit. But the really important thing there is I always add a note to the idea creator as to why I'm not putting it through into our backlog, so people understand the decision making and the rationale behind how we're triaging. So they're encouraged to continue adding their great ideas, because often these ideas are coming from your team and they'll have loads of great ones, and you want to encourage that as much as possible. But at the same time, you can't say yes to everything, because you'd obviously never get anything done. So yeah, the biggest thing is it going to help us move the needle on the things that we care about, essentially. And obviously if there's not enough information there for me to make that decision, then they'll go into a little mini discovery where I'll chat to the person that's added it, see if there's any information we need to add, and then I'll make that decision basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in this snapshot here, which is like a filtered version of all the ideas we have, we can see there's sort of 70 there that have been reviewed at the moment. And when we look through some of the other screenshots, you'll notice the numbers are definitely lower the further over to the right we get.
That's the idea. So that is, I mean, 70, I think, is pretty trim for a backlog anyway. As we move through the discovery process, you'll notice from Liz's screenshots, the numbers reduce as they go through, because we're learning and throwing things out where we don't think they're going to work or otherwise.
So it's not quite such a scary backlog as you would have otherwise seen.
Yeah.
And also regular time on interviews.
Yeah, so again, this actually is a big part of what I love to do. And my role here, I'm very much in the camp with our friend Teresa on continuous discovery. And I think it's one of the things, again, that unfortunately a lot of people just don't find the time for. But I personally make sure I have blocks in my calendar every week, which are dedicated to customer interview time, and make sure that's there for me to chat to potential customers, current customers, also customers that are leaving us as well. There's so much learning and insight that we can take from those people. If you're just relying on those that are actively submitting feedback, you're only getting a really small proportion of your user base input into the product. So it's really important to chat to those that wouldn't necessarily actively come forward with feedback as well. So you've got a really nice breadth of insight coming in that's going to help you improve and build the product.
And presumably then you're using ProdPad itself to manage that.
Obviously the raw notes we'll take outside, but then we basically pull all the insight as feedback into ProdPad, and that helps us build evidence for ideas.
And yeah, as you said, using feedback to validate those ideas. So is that something that like you're linking with ideas from your backlog? Are you linking the feedback in?
Prioritization points, I guess, for when we're looking at ideas is how much evidence have we got of it as a problem. Obviously, of feedback is one element in that, but actually another really critical point for me is the frequency of that feedback. This is actually a feature we launched in ProdPad at the end of last year, actually, which I found so useful, whereas I can see how frequently that feedback's come in. So it may be that we have an idea with 100 pieces of feedback come in, but actually when I look into it, for the last 6 months, we've not had anything. So that then kind of encourages me to ask why and rethink about the prioritization of that idea. So at that point, I'll do a bit of a dive into it and see if it's still a problem for people. And if not, then you can probably deprioritize. I mean, if those 100 people have all churned, which is why you're no longer getting feedback about it, that still means it's a priority, right? Because it was a big enough concern that they probably aren't using the product anymore. But for sometimes your customer base changes on a regular cadence, depending obviously on the product. So you need to be making sure that you're not tied to really old ideas just because once in their life they received loads and loads of feedback when actually you've got quite a different user base now and their problems are different, but also frequency of feedback coming in around certain problems, I think is really critical in the prioritization process.
And then I think we're starting to get a little bit more tactical now. Like we've started thinking about problems and being quite strategic and doing that, not changing that too frequently, quarterly or so. We've looked at monthly stuff, weekly stuff on a really tactical day-to-day basis. You're really moving these ideas through discovery and validation and seeing that as the tactics you use to get things through to dev. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. This is where the workflow, again, is where we as a product team live, specifically in those, I guess, 4 columns there that you can see. As you can see, the numbers here are much smaller than the reviewed column. So we have the work split between us as a team, probably a couple of ideas at a time happening. And part of my job is to be going in, seeing where things are at. Obviously, there's always questions on each of these for me to answer, looking at recent designs, mock-ups, prototypes, research outcomes, seeing what we're learning, and then deciding whether that idea has kind of proved its worth, basically, and either validated or invalidated, which we hope to do as much as we validate. Otherwise, I don't think we're asking the hard enough questions, the different experiments that we're running to see if we can move the needle on any of the metrics we care about.
Got you. No, that makes sense. So we've really taken that big backlog of stuff and broken it right down into step by step and use that to organise the work that we're doing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that is, as I say, having a trim enough backlog to begin with. I think it's really important to empower my team to decide what to work on. Like if you've got a trim enough backlog that as a head of product is going to help you hit all your target outcomes or things you think will help you hit your target outcomes, then it's up to the team to take and explore and discover on those things. So by having a trim-ish backlog, they can go in and just pick things up and start running with it basically, and then seeing what happens. If you've got a backlog of hundreds, 500,000 different things, that's where you're really going to kind of struggle to prioritize what to do next, basically. So that initial tree is really important for us.
So I think it's probably a good time to sum up. We want to make sure we've got a few minutes at the end for any questions that are still hanging around. I think there's a few landing in that Q&A bucket that might be worth looking at. We think about roadmap as the piece that you're working on that's very strategic. It's the thing that you're using to learn about strategy and to communicate strategy, start the conversations, communicate direction. But, don't believe those rumours you hear that product managers have to be just strategic. They can't be tactical. There's different kinds of being tactical. And as a product manager, your backlog is something that's pretty tactical, but you can get through it and manage it and give yourself enough time to do the right things you need to do by breaking that backlog up into those mini backlogs. First of all, those 3 strikes. Let's just think this is what we've got to do discovery on. This is what the dev team are working on that we might put a release plan around. And this is the stuff that we've delivered that we're going back and checking and learning about. But even those 3 buckets, particularly the discovery part, break that down into individual sections that represent the process that you have. And having that regular cadence of working on those different mini backlogs in different ways will mean that everything's always moving forward, those tiny little steps. You're not just suddenly looking at something and thinking, oh, this is a massive elephant that I've got to try and build. Think about, well, how might I start with the toe, or how might I start with the tail, or what do I do about getting its ears just right? You're breaking it up into smaller things and constantly moving it forward. I can see Kirsty laughing at me because I've made an elephant analogy, and I don't know why it did, but it jumped to mind.
I think one of the important things as well is, like, I think a lot of the time as product people, we're consistently, as you alluded to at the beginning, Liz, pulled from pillar to post because people have questions, etc. I've actually found, like, doing these regular cadences of activity means that our work is up to date and really visible for the whole team in ProdPad. So it actually means you have less of that because they have a place to go to answer those questions before they have to come to you. If they go there and still can't answer their questions, then that's something I need to work on. But definitely by doing these regular cadences and making sure as much as possible that our work is visible and up to date with where we're at, really helps the rest of the team know where things are as well. So if sales have with a customer that's talking about a specific problem, they can look at and say, oh, cool, yeah, actually that's about to hit development, for example, which really helps them do their jobs better as well.
Yeah, and I can echo that. Obviously, I'm a product person at heart, but working on the commercial side of the business now, I find it so useful to really know what's going on. And it means that I'm talking to customers about what's happening with the product that I know the product team have blessed, rather than being in the dark and feeling like I need to make it up myself. So it just greases all those wheels and everything just works that little bit better.
Yeah, nice.
So that's all we have today. We've got a few minutes left. I don't know if there are any questions from folk.
Got a few.
So I can see one here. How is the customer interview conducted? Is it in person, via email, or is it via chat?
It really depends. We have it depends how big the piece of work is versus, so we kind of have a bit of a matrix actually that we use, that we define how much time we would spend on research versus the size of the piece we're looking to do discovery on. So sometimes we will jump on, obviously in-person interviews right now, or for the last 2.5 years haven't really been possible, but we'll be doing Zoom calls like this or Meets or any other platform a lot of the time when we're doing bigger pieces of research, where we do kind of anything from half an hour to 1 hour custom interviews with people, where we have a bunch of topics we discuss and kind of talk around. But we can also do stuff via email as well, or in chat if you want to. Normally those things are more like survey based than chat per se, but support obviously chatting to customers and feed that stuff back in. But from a product team perspective, it's normally kind of video calls or kind of survey based for kind of larger numbers of customer.
Okay, that's interesting. There's so many questions here and it's interesting. Can you give a couple examples of target outcomes besides dollar outcomes that you think have been important or you think are important? So what are some ways of measuring success recently that you've looked at?
Obviously, it's purely dependent on what your product is and does. So happy to have a chat about that if you want separately. But I think one of the big things always is conversion. Obviously, conversion leads to dollars. So that's a really interesting one. We look at specific groups of interactions a lot that we know leads to good adoption. So I think a lot of the time people can get really caught up on like weekly active users or daily active users, which obviously are good indications of if people are using your product, but often you'll have like specific interactions in your product that leads to good behavior or good adoption practices or good conversion. And I say having outcomes around those is really useful because it really targets the team on specific things they can do to improve. And all of those things have a long tail to lead to the end dollar, obviously. But if you're just focusing on money, it's a very broad topic. So I'd say get a little bit more granular with the things that you know can lead to dollars. And there's loads of great tools you can use to do that kind of investigation as well.
There's a question here from Tim, and I might take this one. Isn't the wording backlog in outcome backlog a little misleading? What would be the activities to be done to work on that backlog?
Now, it depends on, if you look at Liz's definition of backlog, I can't remember what it was, a list of work that needs to be done, then it is a backlog, right? Like I've got a bunch of ideas or a list of ideas that are sitting there that have work to be done on for me to figure out if they've hit our target outcomes. So I think backlog works for it.
So you're going and checking things like product analytics, you're maybe looking at what your customers have fed back to you about the particular, so maybe we've released a feature and it's sat in that outcome backlog because you're waiting to see what feedback you get from users that you've got to go and investigate and learn about to see if it was successful. Or not.
So it's a mix for me, looking at qualitative feedback that's come in around that feature, going in and checking quantitative metrics as well, watching any flows we have of people using the feature as well, and amalgamating all of that into some kind of report as to whether we hit the outcomes we did. So yeah.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting one. And now I know we have a blog on this, so it's come from Brodie. I'm going to make sure that I forward this on to you, Brodie, after, presuming that we've got the email address. If not, I will tell you, just go to the ProdPad blog and look for a blog about messy backlog. Brodie says, how would you go about inheriting a giant backlog? Think about 2,000 epics, bugs, stories as part of a new role. I've done this, by the way.
I've done this as well. So.
Yeah. I don't think it's right to just archive the lot and start fresh. Why not? But it's unachievable to review work in progress as well as filter that giant messy list of a backlog. So I know that I know even when you started with us, and we were pretty good, but you still had a good clean out, didn't you?
Had a really good
do it?
clean out. Yeah. I think I'd ask the question, why not to archive a lot and start fresh? If you look through and think a lot of it is just old and not applicable anymore, I kind of have a rule of thumb, like if it's important, it comes back. Archiving doesn't mean deleting. Archiving means moving to another kind of holding place, which you can bring back to life when you wish. One of the things I looked at was like how long those things have been sitting there. A bit ties back to the kind of frequency thing I was saying earlier. So yeah, kind of a rule of thumb, if it's been sitting there for, it's up to you to determine your time frame, for over a year, no one's cared about it enough in the last year to do anything about it. So I'd probably archive it and see if it comes back around again. Obviously, unless you're still getting lots of regular feedback about it and it's just that it's been missed and the team haven't prioritized it well enough. So I'd kind of look at those two elements, like the age of the idea or the story or the bug versus the number of feedbacks you're getting about it. And then obviously alongside that, whether it's something that will hit your OKRs. But if you hit negative on all of those, I'd just get rid of it, to be honest. Not get rid of it entirely.
Archive it.
Until it and someone cares about it enough for it to come back.
It'll come back.
Yeah. Because otherwise you're never going to make progress, because you're always going to have new stuff being added to it. And seeing 2,000 will become 2,500 and that will become 3,000. And you'll have this ever-growing list. And that stuff that you probably should have got rid of is still going to be there getting older and nothing happening.
So I've got a question from Adele. You mentioned 3 backlogs. I might take this one, but maybe we do it between us. Do you have any recommendations on how to handle development-focused activities like technical tasks that don't directly relate to the initiatives? Do they belong in the development backlog or somewhere else? I do have opinions on this, and that's that they really do belong in the development backlog and they belong in Jira. Again, this is something we've got a blog on in our blog around about, again, it's the messy backlog side of things. Like, bugs don't belong in your product management or in your discovery backlog. Technical tickets are almost like there's things I would put in as tickets. I would put them in Jira or Trello as almost subtasks. We're trying to achieve an outcome here. This outcome, we have defined a set of steps for how we might achieve it. We've defined it well enough for development to pick it up, but what they do with it from that point onwards is it's part of the execution process. So definitely I'd make sure they belong in the development backlog. Technical tickets, spikes, all that kind of stuff, that's where they belong.
I think Liz said earlier that one of the things around triaging ideas, like if it doesn't link to an initiative, it shouldn't be on the roadmap. I have a slight different opinion on that. So I do think there can be time for like smaller pieces that can be in ProdPad or whatever tool you're using that you're moving through discovery that aren't linked to your roadmap. And generally they're smaller little pieces that you're kind of experiment to test something that's sitting in later, or candidates that you want to get a good feel on, and that kind of stuff you can move through individually. But I'd say most of the development focused activities, yeah, for sure, just should be in your tool of choice. There's no point clouding, unless they need discovery on as well. There's some things we do that need like dev discovery. Those we then may have in ProdPad for kind of visibility, because it's a kind of tag team between dev and design. But for purely development focused tasks, that lives for us in Trello or the Jira.
Now we're right on the end of time here. I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit. We've got 2 questions that I did want to hit, but not in massive detail. One of them, which is a webinar in itself, is how do you overcome the request for dates on the roadmap? Now, we haven't got time to get into it right now. However, we just literally published a couple of days ago a blog on 5 ways to explain to your stakeholders why timeline-driven roadmaps are a bad idea. So please check out that blog, and maybe I'll speak to our folks and see if we can include that in some of the materials we send out after this webinar. And on a similar note, Adele has said, do you have any tips for encouraging sales and marketing departments to get involved in the OKR creation process? And it's kind of similar. It's one of the big keys for me in helping other people understand about product and the product process is exposing them to the value of doing so. Like, if you get involved in this, if you collaborate with us, you're going to see what's going on. You'll find it easier to talk to your customers. You'll have the outcomes that you need in order to be able to sell more. But I need you to be involved in this process so that I understand the kind of things that are important. So there's definitely no shortcuts on any of this stuff. It is about engaging your folks around you and getting them to see what the value is of working with product and understanding that they have needs, and almost doing research with your colleagues to understand what they need from product to be successful. Having that two-way street is certainly something that myself and Kirsty have got. Me on the commercial side, Kirsty on the product side. We speak so frequently. I'm surprised she still speaks to me, to be honest, sometimes. But I have such a clear understanding of what's going on. I know it's in my interest to be involved with product. So I definitely recommend just that collaboration and having your ears open to listen to what those folks need from you, as well as what you need from them.
For sure. And like, we have a really open process here. Like, so whenever we're kicking off discovery on a new problem to be solved, we bring in as many people as relevant and can to that. So we'll pull in dev, QA, customer success, etc., because we get opinions from all different areas of the business in terms of like how we could potentially solve that. So they're invested really early on as well, which I think really helps as well. But yes, essentially we do keep them up to date on what's going on and involve them in testing throughout the process for things that will hopefully solve the problem that they have as well.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It was really good to see such loads of engagement, loads of questions, hopefully lots of stuff that you can take away and see as actionable to make things easier for yourself. We know that being a product manager is hard. Come to us if you've got questions, and I'm sure that you'll hear from us again soon. Thanks, everybody.